2014, the last election that was pre-Donald Trump, Obama was in office, the Tea Party was still a factor, and Mitch McConnell and Harry Reid were the Senate leaders. We're going to take a stroll through these Senate elections and we'll see if anything notable happened. So during Obama's second midterm, Republicans had a fantastic Senate night. They picked up 9 seats here, and that was actually enough for Republicans to flip control, and they had the majority going into Obama's last 2 years. So this was no doubt a red wave and kind of the beginning of the modern political realignment in some of these states that had opposite party senators. So we'll quickly go through this alphabetically. We'll start in Alabama. Now this is Jeff Sessions. He easily won another term, and this is highly notable because Dems didn't even put up a candidate. Sessions ran unopposed with 97.25% of the vote. He would later join the Trump administration, but Dems not even putting up a candidate here. This seems like what the Republicans would have done about 50 years earlier. So that's an easy hold. What about in Alaska? They don't have the box here for whatever reason, but over here on the right, this is good old Dan Sullivan. He actually defeated incumbent Democrat Mark Begich. Dems held this seat for 6 years, but Sullivan, he knocked him off with 48%. This is pre-ranked choice voting, pre-top four primary. And even though it was a red wave nationally, Republicans only won by just over 2 points. How about in Arkansas? Well, up until this point, Dems actually held the Senate seat here. That was because of Mark Pryor. But 2014 was not 2008. Here comes Tom Cotton. He takes out the incumbent by a massive 15-plus point margin. Mark Pryor held under 40%. Big pickup on a state that seems to be red on the surface. Finally, the Senate caught up to it. In Colorado. Back then, still a blue enough state, but what happened here? Republicans actually flipped this seat. They got a great candidate in Congressman Cory Gardner, and he was able to take down incumbent Democrat Mark Udall. Gardner won with a plurality 48.2. It's about a 2 point margin. This was also a year that abortion was a big topic. I remember Udall made that seemingly his signature issue. Maybe voters got burnt out on it, and either way, Republicans actually have a pickup here in this moderately blue state at the time. In Delaware, nothing to see here. Chris Coons easily wins re-election by double digits. Georgia had an interesting runoff here for the Republicans. It was David Perdue and Jack Kingston. Perdue ended up winning by about 1.5%. He would go on to the general and defeat Michelle Nunn. She's the daughter of a former senator here, so that name has some weight. But Georgia is still enough of a red state here that Republicans were able to win it by about 7.5. What about in Hawaii? Super blue state, nothing to see, right? Well, there was a blistering primary battle here between Lieutenant Governor Brian Schatz. He was appointed to this seat after an extremely long-time Democrat, Daniel Inouye, died in office. Schatz defeated Colleen Hanabusa, who was supposed to be Inouye's successor. It was less than a 1% margin for Schatz. Now, in the general election, absolutely nothing to see here. Democrats won by more than 40%. In Idaho, nothing to see here. Republicans easy hold here with Jim Risch. Illinois, nothing too exciting here. Dick Durbin wins another term. It's by about 11 to 12%. In Iowa, here's a notable race. Dems held this seat for a long time with Tom Harkin. It seemed like they were still fairly likely to hold it up until the final couple of months. They had Bruce Braley. Some people might have thought it was Bailey, but he faced a now familiar name, Joni Ernst, in the general election. He didn't run the greatest campaign, and Ernst won by a margin that kind of looks like the Iowa we're used to today. It's just a bit over 8% here, 52 for Ernst, and that was a pickup for the Republicans. In Kansas, I pretty much forgot about this one, but incumbent Republican Pat Roberts, he faced a pretty brutal primary challenge here from somebody named Milton Wolfe. Again, this was still the Tea Party era, so this was a challenge from his right. Roberts won with 48% to Milton's 41. Then in the general election, the Dems dropped out. It was Roberts against Greg Orman. He was an independent, and for a while, it looked like Orman actually could flip this seat for the independents or whoever. This is one of many examples where the polling didn't reflect the actual results until pretty close before the election. In the end, Roberts ended up cruising by over 10% with 53. In Kentucky, McConnell looked like he was in danger, but he ended up cruising over Secretary of State Allison Lundergan Grimes. McConnell didn't look hot in the polling, but winning with 56% says otherwise. How about Louisiana? Dems actually held the seat with Mary Landrieu. It went to a runoff between Landrieu and a familiar name, Bill Cassidy. But this is kind of the end of the era of red states having Dems for the Senate. In the end, Cassidy won by 11%. But if you look a little bit closer at the polling here, again, in the lead up to the election, this looked absolutely competitive. Dems could hold on here. But in the final 1 or 2 months, that's when Cassidy pulled away and it became clear that GOP was going to have a pickup here. That's why many times you've got to wait until the end to see what happens with polling. In Maine, we've got Susan Collins also defeating a familiar name, Sheena Bellows. This was no contest whatsoever, a colossal blowout here. here. Collins' margin was in the high 30s. She's over 68%. So Dems didn't really even compete here whatsoever. How about Massachusetts? Well, it's kind of the inverse. Republicans didn't compete here at all. The Scott Brown days completely over here. Ed Markey easily wins a full term. In Michigan, Republicans here had some hopes of being able to pick the seat up. It was open, and the GOP had a former statewide official, Terry Lynn Land. In the end, this was totally anticlimactic. Gary Peters pulled away, and he won with 54.6%. That's a 13-point margin and an easy hold here for the Dems. Minnesota had Al Franken running for a second term here. You might remember his first one was extremely close, a nail-biter, controversial. He won by a couple handfuls of votes. But going for his second term here, it wasn't close. He won by double digits, just over 10. Speaking of nail-biters, Mississippi absolutely had one here for the Republicans in the primary. Thad Cochran, the incumbent, had a Tea Party challenge to his right. He was actually trailing by a half a point and had to go to a runoff. There, Cochran, the establishment candidate, won by 2%. Chris McDaniel gave it a good run, but that wasn't enough. In the end, Cochran cruised in the general election by more than 20%. In Montana, this seat was held by longtime Democrat Max Baucus. He ended up retiring. In this environment, Republicans eager to pick it up. Now, Baucus was technically appointed as an ambassador, so the governor, Democrat Steve Bullock, appointed John Walsh here to that seat. He ran into some controversy. He ended up not being the nominee in November. In the end, Republican Congressman Steve Daines won his first term here, and that was a pretty easy flip and a pickup for the Republicans. In Nebraska, not much here, even though it was an open seat. Ben Sass won by more than 30%. In New Hampshire, this was a close battle. Either side could have won this one. Former Senator from Massachusetts, Scott Brown, was the nominee for the Republicans, but he lost to incumbent Democrat Jean Shaheen. Her margin was just over 3%. That was a pretty good race. But what about New Jersey? Not much here. Cory Booker won the open seat. Nothing fancy, just about an 11-point margin. It was similar in New Mexico. Dems had an easy hold here of about 11% for Tom Udall. North Carolina had one of its nail-biters. Kay Hagan was the incumbent Democrat. Tom Tillis, remember him? He was the guy for the Republicans. In the end, boosted by the environment, Tillis knocked off Hagan by about a 1.5% margin. He had a plurality of 48.8%. In Oklahoma, a pretty red state, nothing notable here. Jim Inhofe winning by about a 40% margin. There was also a special election here. James Lankford got it done for the Republicans. Nothing shocking here. Their margin was similar. In Oregon, this was an easy hold here for the Dems. Jeff Merkley winning by about 19%. In Rhode Island, Jack Reed cruised here. He won another term. He actually topped 70% here on his win. South Carolina also had two elections. There's a lot going on here, but the results are as expected. Lindsey Graham won another term. He got 54.3%. At the same time, we've got Tim Scott. He won a full term here. He got up to 61%. So Republicans holding a couple seats there. But what about South Dakota? That was another state where the Dems actually held this seat. Tim Johnson not running again. So Republicans put up former Governor Mike Rounds, and he defeated not only the Democrat there, but he defeated former Senator Larry Pressler, who was a Republican back in the 70s. Rounds got a majority, 50.4%. How about Tennessee? Lamar Alexander did face some heat in a primary, but he got 49.7%. That was just a 9% margin for Alexander. In the general election, he cruised by 30%. How about Texas? Back then, there's absolutely nothing going on here. John Cornyn easily won another term, and I bet Republicans miss these kind of margins, but Cornyn was at 61.5%. Then we've got Virginia. This was a hold here for the Dems. Mark Warner was at 49.1%, but that was less than 1% of Ed Gillespie, who's at 48.3%. If you take a look at the polling here from that race, that was nearly a massive upset. Warner was leading every single poll, many of them by comfortable margins. So Gillespie came out of nowhere, almost took down Warner. But in the other Virginia, West Virginia, it's a different story. Here's another red state that Dems held in the Senate. Dems were actually pretty dominant overall here in the state at the time. They put up Secretary of State Natalie Tennant, who had to really distance herself from the Obama administration. In the end, there was absolutely no contest here. Shelley Moore Capito won her first term. Her margin was about 27-28% during that flip. Finally, in Wyoming, it's going to be a soft finish here because Mike Enzi, the Republican, easily won another term here. There was talk about Liz Cheney getting into this thing, but in the end, it didn't happen. And here's a Wyoming margin for you. Enzi is at 72.2%. That's a margin in the mid-50s there for the GOP. There was an independent candidate on the ballot, but Enzi won every single county, including the two blue ones. And that's a flashback at the 2014 U.S. Senate elections. A lot of great stuff there if you actually look beneath the surface. Some of the primary battles are pretty brutal. The Tea Party was still a force at the time. Dems didn't really face many intra-party battles. They were more focused on supporting the White House at the time. But in the last election pre-Trump, this was kind of the end of the era of red states having Dems in the Senate. You can see the map here with all the flips. Again, 9 of them for the Republicans. Also, some extremely easy holds in states like Maine and Texas. And even though the red wave spilled over into states like Colorado, it wasn't enough in a place like Michigan or New Hampshire. A lot of these candidates are still in office today. Some of them have gone down, some of their names have been completely forgotten. But as of 2026, this is actually the most recent midterm where Republicans actually had a real wave. If it were Mitt Romney in the White House, then I would suspect Dems would have had a lot more seats here. That's kind of the trade-off that usually happens. But that's a quick look at this 2014 or 2014 U.S. Senate election. So let me know in the comments. What stands out to you here? Is it Republicans gaining 9 seats and capturing the majority? What about some of these states? How about the candidates? How about the margins? Let me know what you think down below on your way out. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Join if you'd like to support the channel. Hit the bell for notifications. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.